The question about why, let's say, a mushroom would trigger, basically the model that we present is that the mushroom chemically triggers the dream apparatus during a waking state. And not to put too fine a point on it, the reason that a mushroom might want to do that is to freak the crap out of the creature that had eaten the mushroom. And the idea is a freaked out creature is actually better than a poisoned creature. If you poison a creature, the nature of ecology is such that that creature will then be replaced by a naive creature who might eat the mushroom next time.
Well, given that it's impossible to titrate the poison, right? Like that you may inadvertently kill the creature you're poisoning, even if it would be to your benefit to merely leave it ill. Whereas the titration issue isn't so much one if you're talking about an entheogen.
Right. Yeah. And the training program is spectacular. If you found yourself with no explanation, let's say that you had no exposure to entheogens, and you found yourself waiting for the train and suddenly hallucinating things that weren't there, it would be good and spooky. And to the extent that a deer, for example, might ingest a mushroom and have a good and spooky experience. And, certainly there's a program in the deer that says, did you do anything different that might have caused what happened? Because you'd like not to have that happen again. It makes you more likely to be eaten by a predator or whatever. It's a good training program.
The difference between the deer and us being that the deer who just had the psychotic break that it didn't want is likely to try to figure out unconsciously, presumably, what it did differently and never go there again. And many humans have the opposite response. Oh, that was interesting. Let's see if we can repeat that.
Right. In fact, we use it as a hack in order to tap into parts of our psychology that are ordinarily barred from, or our conscious mind is barred from connecting with them. And so it can be, among the most useful tools that we have. Or we can do other things like some cultures would have a shaman who would tap into that state one way or the other. Yeah. And the shaman, therefore, would allow a culture to hack its own belief structure in a relatively safe way. Because if the shaman is saying things that are particularly off, one can ignore them or dismiss them in some way. And if the shaman is saying things that are insightful, one can incorporate them, but there's a kind of compartmentalization in that structure.
Well, and this is exactly, and we get to it later in the book, but you also already invoked the culture and consciousness that we introduce in the first chapter. The shaman is the conscious voice, and the sacred, the reified, this is how we've always done things, is the cultural voice. So, shaman is to sacred as consciousness is to culture.
But in essence, what you've said is that from the mushroom's perspective, there's a defensive function being played here. The mushroom doesn't want its reproductive apparatus eaten and destroyed, so it produces something that will hopefully prevent that from happening in the future. And actually, right, there's a lot of examples of this in the plant world and the fungal world. In most cases that I'm aware of, where there is any clear evidence, the psychoactive component of a plant, whether it's caffeine, whether it is THC or cannabinoids in cannabis, it is playing some kind of defensive role. It might just be killing insects, for example, but the plant doesn't want you to eat its reproductive organ, basically.
Yeah,
it's a secondary compound is the term for it. Secondary compound means that the molecule doesn't have a physiological function inside the plant. It's waiting there for some creature on whom it will have its effect, and that effect is negative. And then the twist in humans is that the hallucinogenic effect is not always negative.
Well, but secondary compound doesn't require that the effect be negative. And with regard to caffeine, for instance, there's, caffeine is to some degree a memory enhancer. And it is actually demonstrated that caffeinated flowers that bees visit produce a better ability for those bees to, return to the same flowers.
Okay, but so this is interesting, and it extends the question of what a secondary compound is. Yeah. But if I'm to be that annoying student who pushes things then even further, what do we do with something like sugar in an apple? Right? That sugar is in the apple as a reward for an animal in order to distribute the seeds. Is that a secondary compound? Yeah,
I don't know, but caffeine appears to be a secondary compound. So I guess maybe this is just a semantic argument. You're saying we don't call it a secondary compound unless it's got a negative, understood to be negative.
I'm wondering. No, I like your point about caffeine being an enhancement of the capacities of a creature to return to a flower where the flower is got a symbiont.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if.
Well, I think the unifying thing here is, right, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the secondary compound it's sort of acting in another organism on behalf of the first one. The caffeine might be enhancing the memory of a bee, but it's not doing anything else so far as we can tell for the actual flower other than that.
Exactly. And I guess that's how I understand the definition at its most basic.
Yeah, I agree.
It doesn't have a value. It doesn't have a value, negative or positive.
Right. Yeah.